I was making dinner when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my husband. "I'm done providing for you. Figure it out yourself." Little did he know, I'd been preparing for this moment for months. After 15 years of marriage, my world shattered with a single text message. My husband, who I'd supported through medical school and helped build his private practice, decided I wasn't worth keeping around anymore. He thought he had all the power, the money, the connections, the future. But there was one thing he forgot about. I owned the building where his prestigious medical office was located, a detail he'd conveniently overlooked when signing the lease under his business name 5 years ago. When we first met, James was just a struggling medical student with mountains of debt and big dreams. I was working as an office manager at a law firm, making enough to support us both. Every night, I'd come home exhausted after a full day's work, only to find him surrounded by textbooks, barely noticing when I walked through the door. Still, I believed in him. I'd cook dinner, clean the apartment, and even quiz him before exams. For 7 years, I put my own career aspirations on hold, taking extra shifts to cover our bills and his education costs. "It'll all be worth it when I'm established," he'd promise, eyes gleaming with ambition. "We'll have the life we've always dreamed of." When he finally graduated, I organized a celebration dinner for his family and friends. I'd saved for months to make it special, wanting everyone to see how proud I was of him. That night, James stood up to make a toast. "I couldn't have done this without my beautiful wife," he said, raising his glass. The room erupted in applause, and my heart swelled. In that moment, I truly believed we were partners, building our future together brick by brick. His mother hugged me afterward. "You've been his rock," she whispered. "Not many women would sacrifice so much." I didn't see it as sacrifice then. I saw it as investment. An investment in us. As James started his residency, the hours got longer, and our time together shrunk. I'd wait up just to see his face, even if it was just for a few bleary-eyed minutes at 2 a.m. The distance began then slowly, almost imperceptibly. He'd come home with stories about his colleagues, the talented doctor this, or the brilliant doctor that. I'd listen, feeling increasingly like a spectator in his life, rather than a participant. When I'd share stories from my day, his eyes would glaze over. "That's nice," he'd mumble, already reaching for his phone. I told myself it was just the stress of residency, the sleep deprivation making him distant. I believed things would change once he was established. When my father passed away unexpectedly, leaving me a modest inheritance, James was surprisingly interested in the details. "We should invest it," he suggested over dinner one night. "Real estate is always smart." I agreed. Property in our growing city seemed like a solid plan. We found a commercial building for sale downtown, perfectly located with space for medical offices. "It's perfect for my future practice," James said, eyes calculating. I used my inheritance for the down payment, putting the property in my name, as my financial advisor suggested. James was too busy to deal with paperwork details anyway. We renovated the ground floor into a state-of-the-art medical suite, with me handling contractors while working full-time. Looking back, I realized this was the first piece in a chess game I didn't know I was playing. After James completed his residency, he opened his practice in our building. The location was perfect, close to the hospital, with plenty of parking and beautiful interiors I'd designed. Business boomed almost immediately. His reputation grew, and soon he was the go-to specialist in our city. I watched with pride as my husband's dream materialized before my eyes. "We did it," I'd say, emphasizing the we. He'd smile distractedly and correct me. "It's been quite the journey." Not our journey anymore, just the journey. Those subtle shifts in language were like hairline fractures in the foundation of our marriage, barely visible but deeply structural. As James's practice thrived, our home life deteriorated. He'd come home later and later, citing paperwork or emergency consultations. His phone would ping constantly during dinner, and he'd take calls in another room, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked about the practice's finances, "After all, I had a stake in this too," he'd brush me off. "It's complicated medical billing," he'd say, as if I couldn't possibly understand. "Don't worry your pretty head about it." I'd swallow my frustration. remembering how I'd managed our household finances for years while he studied. Somewhere along the way, my competence had become inconvenient to his narrative. 3 years into his practice, James suggested I quit my job. "You don't need to work anymore," he said, sliding a credit card across the table. "Just use this for whatever you need." It wasn't presented as an option, but as a decision already made. I protested at first. I'd built my own career, had colleagues who respected me, responsibilities I valued. "Don't you want to travel more? Enjoy life?" he countered, making my career sound like a burden rather than an achievement. Slowly, my resistance eroded under the constant pressure. I resigned, believing we were entering a new phase of our partnership where I could focus on our life together. Instead, I found myself alone in our large house, waiting for a husband who rarely came home. My first inkling that something was seriously wrong came from Nancy, the receptionist at James's practice. We'd become friends over the years, meeting occasionally for lunch. "There's a new office manager," she mentioned casually over salads. "Melissa, just started last month." I froze fork midair. I didn't know James had hired an office manager. When I asked him about it that evening, his reaction was defensive. "I don't have time to discuss every hiring decision with you," he snapped. That night, I couldn't sleep. I slipped downstairs and opened his laptop, something I'd never done before. The password was still our anniversary date. His email loaded automatically, and there they were: hotel reservations, jewelry receipts, intimate messages. Melissa wasn't just an office manager. My husband was having an affair with a woman nearly 20 years younger than me, and everyone at his practice probably knew. Instead of confronting James immediately, I made an appointment with his practice under a fake name. I wanted to see her, this woman who was apparently worth destroying 15 years of marriage. When I walked in, Melissa was at the front desk, beautiful in that effortless way that made my carefully applied makeup feel like a desperate attempt at relevance. "I have an appointment," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She smiled professionally, checking the system. "We don't seem to have you down," she frowned. "But Dr. Matthews has a cancellation. I can squeeze you in." I thanked her, sitting in the waiting room I'd helped design, looking at the artwork I'd selected. Everything around me was testament to my investment in a future that was being stolen from me. James's face when he saw me in the examination room was almost worth the humiliation. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, closing the door quickly. I smiled calmly, though my heart was racing. "Just a checkup," I replied. "Don't married couples normally see other doctors?" he asked, glancing nervously at the door. "I wanted to see your office manager in person," I said quietly. The color drained from his face. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Instead, what he said next shocked me more than the affair itself. "I want a divorce," he announced, as if reading a diagnosis from a chart. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. You'll be taken care of, but I need space to grow." Space to grow? After 15 years of supporting his growth at the expense of my own? That night, James didn't come home. He texted that he was staying at the office to give me time to process. I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the life we'd built, feeling like an intruder in my own home. The shock gave way to a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I called my old boss at the law firm, who connected me with their best divorce attorney. "Don't touch anything financial yet," the lawyer advised. "Just document everything." For the next week, I moved through our house like a detective, photographing valuables, collecting financial statements, making copies of tax returns. James had been careless, assuming I'd never look closely at our finances. I discovered offshore accounts, suspicious transfers, and a pattern of hidden income from his practice. What surprised me most wasn't his deception, but my own blindness. I'd been so busy believing in us that I'd failed to see him. 2 weeks after my impromptu office visit, James finally came home to collect some things. He looked different somehow, younger, his hair freshly styled, wearing clothes I'd never seen. "I transferred some money to your personal account," he said, not meeting my eyes. "To tide you over." I thanked him politely, not mentioning that I'd already seen the transfer. $5,000, a pittance compared to our actual finances. "You can stay here until we sort things out," he added magnanimously, as if granting me permission to live in my own home. I asked where he was staying. With a friend, he lied smoothly. I nodded, knowing from my surveillance that he'd moved into Melissa's downtown apartment. As he packed, I noticed he was taking only new things, leaving behind all traces of our years together. When he left, I didn't cry. Instead, I sat at our dining table and drafted a formal letter from my lawyer. A notice of rent increase for Matthew's medical associates, effective immediately. James received the rent increase notice during a full day of appointments. I know this because Nancy texted me. OMG, you should have seen his face. The letter informed him that the rent would triple, effective in 30 days as allowed by the commercial lease he'd signed. He called immediately, his voice tight with controlled fury. "What is this?" he demanded. I responded with the calm professionalism I'd learned during years of office management. "It's a business decision," I explained. "I've reviewed market rates for medical offices in the area, and I've been significantly undercharging." He sputtered about contracts and agreements, but I had done my homework. The lease was ironclad, with an escalation clause that had never been exercised. "This is vindictive," he finally said. "This is business," I corrected him. "Wasn't it you who told me not to mix emotions with financial decisions?" Over the next week, James cycled through the stages of negotiation: anger, threats, attempted compromise, and finally bargaining. He sent his lawyer to meet with mine, offering a generous divorce settlement in exchange for maintaining the original rent. My lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit, smiled across the conference table. "My client isn't interested in generosity," she said. "She's interested in fair market value, both for the property and for the marriage." The truth was, I had discovered through my investigation that James had been hiding significant income from the practice. By raising the rent, I forced financial disclosure that would be crucial in our divorce proceedings. Every attempt he made to fight the increase revealed more about his actual finances. While the lawyers battled, I focused on rebuilding my life. I reached out to my old professional network, surprised to find how many people were eager to help. I enrolled in courses to update my skills, joined a support group for divorcees, and reconnected with friends James had subtly pushed away over the years. One afternoon, I had coffee with Dr. Sanderson, an older physician who had mentored James. "I never understood why he left you," he confided. "Everyone in the medical community respects you more than him." That simple validation from someone in James's world healed something in me. I realized I'd spent years measuring my worth through James's eyes, forgetting that others saw me very differently. Dr. Sanderson mentioned that several practices were looking for experienced office managers who understood medical billing. "With your knowledge of both worlds," he said, "you'd be an asset." 3 months into our separation, James's carefully constructed new life began crumbling under financial scrutiny. The increased rent forced him to reveal his actual practice income during divorce proceedings, exposing years of hidden assets. Melissa, it turned out, was less interested in a struggling doctor than a successful one. Nancy reported that their office romance had soured as James became increasingly stressed and short-tempered. My lawyer called with updates that made me realize how thoroughly James had planned to discard me with a fraction of what I was legally entitled to. "He really thought you wouldn't fight back," she marveled. "Men like him always underestimate women like you." The practice was now struggling to maintain its luxury image while meeting the new rent obligations. James faced a choice: relocate his established practice at enormous expense or negotiate fairly in our divorce. Either way, the control he thought he had was slipping through his fingers like sand. 6 months after James's devastating text, I sat across from him in our final mediation session. Gone was his arrogant confidence, replaced by dark circles under his eyes and a tightness around his mouth. The financial discovery process had exposed not just his hidden assets but his character. Several of his colleagues had reached out to me privately, sharing stories of James taking credit for others' work, overbilling patients, cutting ethical corners. The man sitting before me was a stranger, or perhaps he'd always been this person, and I'd refused to see it. "I'm prepared to be reasonable about the rent," I said calmly, "if you're prepared to be honest about our marital assets." His lawyer whispered something in his ear, and James nodded reluctantly. It was the first time in our marriage that I had genuine leverage, and we both knew it. The settlement we reached was fair, far more equitable than what James had initially offered. I maintained ownership of the building, but agreed to a more reasonable rent increase. In exchange, I received half of our actual marital assets, including accounts he'd thought were untraceable. As we signed the final papers, James finally looked me in the eye. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said, a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect in his voice. I simply smiled. "I learned from watching you," I replied. Outside the lawyer's office, standing on the sidewalk where our paths would finally diverge, he asked what I planned to do next. The question surprised me. It was the first time in years he'd expressed interest in my future. "I'm going to thrive," I said simply, and walked away without looking back. With the divorce finalized, I had decisions to make about the building. Several doctors from the hospital had approached me about renting space, James's colleagues who'd grown tired of his tactics. I renovated the upper floor, creating 2 additional medical suites with higher-end finishes than James's office. The contractors who'd worked on the original renovation were happy to return, remembered how I'd treated them respectfully, and paid promptly. Within 2 months, I had the building fully leased to ethical practitioners who valued the location and professional management. I didn't evict James. That would have been petty. Instead, I became his landlord. Our relationship reduced to monthly rent checks and occasional maintenance requests. Every payment was a reminder that the woman he'd dismissed had become a person he couldn't afford to antagonize. What surprised me most about my new life was how quickly I found my footing. The skills I'd used supporting James's career transferred perfectly to managing my own business interests. I took courses in commercial property management, joined networking groups for women investors, and began looking for my next building. The income from the medical offices provided financial security, but more importantly, it gave me confidence. I hired Nancy away from James's practice to help manage the property, doubling her salary and adding benefits. "He's going through office managers like tissues," she told me gleefully. "No one stays more than a few weeks." Melissa had left shortly after the rent increase, quickly finding another doctor with more promising prospects. At night, in the home I decided to keep in the settlement, I sometimes marveled at how completely my life had transformed from desperate heartbreak to purposeful independence. About a year after our divorce, I ran into James at a medical charity gala. I was there as the property manager for several physicians who had sponsored tables. He was alone, nursing a drink at the bar, watching as I moved comfortably through the crowd, greeted warmly by many of his colleagues. When our eyes met, I nodded politely and continued my conversation. Later, he approached slightly unsteady. "You look different," he observed. I was different, confident, well-dressed in a gown I'd bought myself, carrying myself with the assurance of a woman who knew her worth. "Life suits you," I replied simply. He started to say something else, perhaps an apology or justification, but I excused myself to join a group of doctors who were discussing expanding their practice into my newest building acquisition. As I walked away, I felt his eyes following me, and for the first time, there was no pain in that awareness, only a calm recognition of how far I'd come. The news reached me through the efficient medical community grapevine. James's practice was struggling. His questionable billing practices had triggered an insurance audit. Several patients had filed complaints about his increasingly brusque manner. The talented staff he'd once attracted were migrating to other practices, including those in my buildings. I felt no pleasure in his difficulties, just a detached recognition of natural consequences. One rainy Tuesday, he appeared at my office without an appointment. "I need to renegotiate the lease," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "Things are challenging right now." I listened professionally as he outlined his situation, noting how he avoided taking responsibility for his circumstances. When he finished, I slid a folder across my desk. "These are the standard terms I offer to medical tenants experiencing temporary difficulties," I explained. The relief on his face was palpable until he realized the documents required financial transparency, and ethical practice commitments in exchange for rent adjustment. You're enjoying this, aren't you? James accused, pushing the folder away. I considered the question seriously. I don't enjoy seeing anyone struggle professionally, I answered truthfully. But I do appreciate the symmetry. For years, I supported your success while you planned to discard me with nothing. Now I'm in a position to help or hinder your practice. I tapped the folder. These are the same terms I've offered other tenants. Fair but protecting my interests. He took the papers reluctantly, his fingers brushing mine in the first physical contact we'd had since the divorce. For a moment, I remembered the young medical student I'd fallen in love with, brilliant and driven, but also kind and idealistic. What happened to you? I asked softly, not expecting an answer. He looked startled, then thoughtful. Success, he finally said. I started believing I deserved everything I wanted, no matter the cost. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. That brief moment of vulnerability didn't last. James signed the modified lease agreement, but immediately began looking for ways around its stipulations. I learned from building maintenance that he was cutting corners, overworking his reduced staff, staying later and later trying to maintain appearances. Twice, rent checks bounced, something that would have been unimaginable in his heyday. After the second incident, I visited his office personally. The waiting room was noticeably emptier than before, the magazines outdated, the plants dying from neglect. Melissa's replacement was a tired-looking older woman who barely looked up when I entered. James's office had lost its polished perfection, files stacked haphazardly, his desk cluttered with unanswered messages. When he saw me, he straightened defensively. "The rent's coming," he said immediately. I nodded. "I know it is. That's not why I'm here." I placed a business card on his desk for a practice management consultant I knew. She helped several of my tenants streamline their operations. No obligation, just a resource. He stared at the card for a long moment before pocketing it, neither accepting nor rejecting the gesture. 2 years after James's text message changed my life, I received another unexpected communication from him. This one came on professional letterhead, formally notifying me that Matthew's medical associates would not be renewing their lease. After careful consideration, the letter read, "We have decided to relocate to better serve our patient population." The corporate language couldn't disguise what everyone in medical circles already knew. James was downsizing dramatically, moving to a small office in a less prestigious area, his practice a shadow of what it once was. I acknowledged the notice professionally, initiating the standard procedures for tenant transition. Privately, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Not triumph, exactly, but a sense of chapters closing appropriately. The building that had witnessed both the height of his success and the beginning of his decline would now continue without him. The day James's office moved out, I was there to conduct the final walkthrough. The space echoed emptily, marks on the walls where artwork had hung, indentations in the carpet where furniture had stood. James supervised the last few boxes being loaded, his movements efficient but weighted with unspoken feelings. When the movers left, we stood alone in the space that had housed so many significant moments in our intertwined stories. "So this is it," he said, looking around. I nodded, consulting my checklist with deliberate focus. "Just need to collect the keys and confirm the forwarding address for your security deposit." He handed me the keys, our fingers avoiding contact this time. Before leaving, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you deserved better than what I gave you." I looked up, surprised by the genuine regret in his voice. "Yes," I agreed simply. "I did." With James gone, I completely renovated his former office, transforming it into a modern wellness center with multiple practitioners sharing the space. The concept attracted a diverse group of healthcare providers, a female cardiologist expanding her practice, a physical therapist specializing in women's health, a nutritionist focused on preventive care. The waiting room I redesigned featured comfortable seating, living plants, and a small play area for patients' children. Natural light flooded the space that had once been James's dark, imposing office. On opening day, as I watched patients entering the welcoming environment, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with my ex-husband. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about creation. I had taken something painful and transformed it into something that would help others. The building that began as an investment in James's future had become the foundation of my own. The wellness center thrived beyond my projections, creating a template I began replicating in other properties. I found I had a talent for identifying medical needs in communities and creating spaces that addressed them effectively. My background, the years of supporting a medical practice, understanding healthcare workflows, recognizing what practitioners and patients valued, provided insights pure real estate investors lacked. I was invited to speak at healthcare conferences about integrative practice spaces, consulted on hospital expansions, mentored women entering commercial real estate. Occasionally, I would hear updates about James through mutual connections. He had relocated outside the city, focusing on a smaller practice. There were rumors he was dating again, someone age-appropriate with her own established career. I found I could wish him well without bitterness. The text that once shattered my world had ultimately forced me to rebuild myself stronger than before. 3 years to the day after receiving James's devastating message, I sat in my office reviewing plans for my newest development, a multi-story medical complex that would house several complementary practices and an outpatient surgery center. My phone buzzed with a text notification. For a moment, my heart stuttered with old conditioning before I checked the screen. It was from my contractor, confirming tomorrow's meeting. I smiled at my momentary reaction, recognizing how far I'd come from the woman who had once been defined by her husband's success and decisions. That evening, I hosted a dinner for the women in my property management mentorship program. Looking around the table at their engaged, determined faces, I felt a surge of purpose. Many had stories similar to mine, relationships where their contributions were minimized, talents overlooked, futures constrained. Now they were rewriting their narratives, just as I had. During that dinner, one of the younger women asked what I considered the turning point in my journey, from devastated wife to successful businesswoman. The question made me reflect on the complex path I'd traveled. It wasn't one moment, I answered carefully. It was a series of decisions to value myself when someone else didn't. Around the table, I saw understanding nods. When my husband said he was done providing for me, he thought he was announcing my end, I continued. Instead, he was declaring his irrelevance to my future. The conversation flowed from there, each woman sharing moments when rejection or dismissal had ultimately propelled them forward. As dessert was served, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from a major healthcare system interested in leasing space in my new development. Success, I had discovered, was the most satisfying response to abandonment. What I never shared with my dinner companions was a brief encounter I'd had with Melissa a few months earlier. I'd been leaving a restaurant when she approached, visibly nervous but determined. "Can I speak with you for a minute?" she asked. Curious, I agreed. Over coffee, she offered an unexpected apology. "I was young and impressed by what I thought was success," she explained. "I didn't understand what it meant to build something real with someone." She had left James shortly after his practice began declining, quickly discovering that the charm that had wooed her evolved into controlling behavior when stressed. Now engaged to someone her own age, she'd felt compelled to acknowledge her role in my pain. I appreciated her courage, recognizing that growth often comes through uncomfortable reckonings. "We all make decisions based on who we are at the time," I told her. "What matters is who we choose to become afterward." Looking back on these 3 transformative years, I sometimes marvel at how completely my identity has shifted. From James's supportive wife, to a woman known for her own accomplishments and vision. The property that was originally purchased to house his practice now serves as headquarters for my expanding real estate company. The skills I developed supporting his career now drive my success. Even our divorce, which he initiated believing I would crumble, became the catalyst for my reinvention. There's a powerful lesson here about recognizing your own value when others don't, about knowing that someone else's assessment of your worth isn't the final word on your potential. When James texted that he was done providing for me, he couldn't imagine that I would not only survive but thrive without his provision. The greatest revenge wasn't taking his money or raising his rent. It was discovering I had always been capable of building something remarkable without him. And that realization is worth more than any settlement could provide. Can you imagine having your life turned upside down in a single moment? That text message from my husband was meant to be my ending, but instead became my beginning. The journey I've shared isn't just about getting even, it's about getting better. About recognizing your own value when someone else tries to discount it. Perhaps there's something in your life right now where you're being undervalued. Maybe it's a relationship where your contributions are invisible, a workplace where your talents go unnoticed, or a family dynamic where your voice is consistently ignored. What would happen if you decided today to recognize your own worth regardless of others' assessments? The most powerful moment in my story wasn't when I raised James's rent or finalized our divorce. It was when I stopped measuring my success against his expectations and started building according to my own vision. That's the revenge that truly satisfies. Not tearing someone else down, but building yourself up beyond what they thought possible. If this story resonated with you, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week, I share stories of remarkable resilience and unexpected second chances. And leave a comment below telling me about a time when someone underestimated you and how you proved them wrong. Your story matters, and it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.